أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Lesson number 226, Surah Saba. We'll begin from ayah number 12. وَلِسُلَيْمَانَ الرِّيحَ. And to Sulaiman alayhi salam, we subjected the wind. In the previous ayah, who is mentioned? Dawood alayhi salam. And the favors that Allah had bestowed on Dawood alayhi salam, they are mentioned. Amongst them are that iron was softened for him, and the mountains and the birds were also subjected for him, so that when he would glorify Allah, they would also glorify Allah along with him, because they were commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do so. أَوِّ بِمَعْهُ. And we see that Dawood alayhi salam, what was he told? That this blessing that you have been given, that iron is soft for you, what should you do with it? What should you do with it? Make chainmail, coats of armor. Why? In order to benefit people. And it is said that he would make them by his hand, and he would sell them, and the money that he would make, he would use it to cover his expenses. So he would earn his own livelihood by his own hand, by his own hard work. And how was he instructed that how should he make the chainmail? Qaddir, that make it properly, in the sense that whatever work that you're doing, do it properly, do it with excellence. Just because you're doing a worldly chore does not mean you don't do it properly, because if you don't do it properly, then other people will suffer. Think about it. It was only chainmail, it was only coats of armor, but he was making them and he was giving them to people. And when people would wear them, they would have to go to battle. Now just imagine if he hadn't made them properly. Would the people suffer? Of course. How would you feel when you buy something and it breaks the first time you use it? Don't you feel upset? You feel extremely angry. You feel as if you've been cheated. So Dawood alayhi salam, what was he instructed? That when you do your work, do it properly. وَقَدِّرْ فِي السَّرْدِ. Do it properly. And along with that, وَعْمَلُوا صَالِحًا. Don't forget other righteous deeds. And remember that Allah is watching you. Because when a person has this awareness that Allah is watching me, then he does his work properly. And then Sulaiman alayhi salam is mentioned. وَلِسُلَيْمَانَ الرِّيحَ. That for Sulaiman alayhi salam, we had subjected the wind. The favors that Allah had bestowed upon Sulaiman alayhi salam, they are being mentioned now. And this wind, what does it mean by this, that it was subjected for him? That first of all, it was within his control. So he could make it blow fast, he could make it blow slow, he could make it blow in a particular direction. Because Sulaiman alayhi salam, he had many armies. Isn't it so? Junud. And with those junud, he would travel. And he would travel on air, he would travel on water, and he would also travel on land. Now when it comes to traveling by water, what do you need? What do you need? Winds, right? Especially in the olden times when people would use sails. So the wind was in his control. If he wanted the wind to blow very fast, he could do that. And like this, they would sail very quickly. And if he wanted the wind to blow in a particular direction, even that he could do. So it was completely in his control. وَلِسُلَيْمَانَ الرِّيحَ. And secondly, وَلِسُلَيْمَانَ الرِّيحَ, that the wind was subjected to him, that he had some form of air travel. They could travel by air in some way. Which way exactly? Allahu A'lam. These days, what do people use? Planes and helicopters and so on and so forth. At that time, Allahu A'lam what he had, but he had the wind in his control, because of which he could travel on air. And how would he travel? In what speed? غُدُوُّهَا شَهْرٌ. Its morning was a month. Meaning, غُدُوُّهَا, ha refers to the rih, that when he would make the wind blow fast, in one morning, in ghudu, they were able to travel what a person would normally travel in how long? Shahrun, a month. So ghudubuha shahrun. And ghudu is used for what part of the day? Early morning, early part of the day. وَإِذْ غَدَوْتَ مِنْ أَهْلِكَ. When the Prophet ﷺ left early in the morning at the Battle of Badr. And it's the time between Fajr and sunrise. How long is it? Not too long, isn't it? These days you may have been experiencing it. As you're up for suhood, and you wake up at Fajr, then you can't go back to sleep, and you're doing some azkar and reading the Quran, and you see it's bright outside. It doesn't take that long, right? So The time of ghudu is just the time between fajr and sunrise. That's it. So, in that amount of time, probably an hour, maximum an hour and a half, in that long they were able to travel what a person would normally travel, shahrun, in a month. What does it show? That they had some form of air travel. وَرَوَاحُهَا, and its evening trip was how long? Shahrun, a month as well. Rawah, from the root letters, ra, waw, ha. And rawah is used for the evening, and it's used for the time when the sun sets until nightfall. So from sunset until nightfall, again, when there's twilight in the sky. The sun sets, there's still some brightness in the sky, isn't it so? And then eventually, when do you pray Isha? When the twilight has disappeared, when the night has completely fallen. So that time is called rawah. And according to others, rawah is used for from the time when the sun begins to decline, from zawal until sunset. So from the time until the sun begins to decline until sunset. So in any way, what is it? Evening. Late afternoon, evening, nighttime, whatever you want to call it. But again, it's not really that long of a period. So in that time, again, how much could they travel? Shahrun, a month. What do we see over here? That in one day, Sulaiman a.s. was able to take a trip that would be a month's journey and also come back. In the morning they would leave, do whatever they had to do, and come back in the evening. Just imagine, it would take them this little time. One more thing we see, that the morning is mentioned and the evening is mentioned. And the morning, which part is mentioned? Early morning. So when would they leave for their work? Early morning. And they would go do everything and come back by evening. It is said that Sulaiman a.s., he would embark with his army onto the wind. You may have seen about the magic carpet, right? How it flies in the air. So, Allahu A'lam, they had some form of embarking on the wind. They wouldn't travel by land, but they would embark on the wind, so they would float somehow, probably sitting on something. And then the wind was completely under his control. He could make it blow fast, he could make it blow slow, he could make it go right, left, north, south, east, west, in whichever direction that he wanted to. This was a huge favor of Allah that was bestowed upon him. Because today even, people, if they do have some form of air travel or sea travel, do they have the wind in their control? They don't have it. Many times we see that certain trips, they become longer. Why? Because the wind was not in the favor of people. And sometimes they become shorter because the wind was blowing in their favor. You may have seen that sometimes you go by air, you're traveling, and you find out you're arriving 10 minutes early, 15 minutes early, half an hour early. Why? Because the wind is in the favor of the plane. Right? So this was a huge favor that was bestowed on Sulaiman a.s. More favors, special favors. وَأَسَلْنَا لَهُ, and we caused to flow for him. Asalna, sin, ya, lam, sail. Sail is to flow, and the word sail is also used for flood. Because in a flood, what's happening constantly? The water is flowing. So وَأَسَلْنَا, we made to flow, lahu, for Sulaiman a.s. What did we make to flow for him? Ayn al-qitar, spring of molten metal. Ayn over here does not mean eye. What does it mean? Spring. Because remember, ayn is also used for a water source. Because just as from the eye, tears flow, similarly, from a spring, what flows out? Water. So ayn is a spring, a fountain, a source. But from this spring, it wasn't that water gushed out. But what gushed forth out of it? Al-qitr, molten metal. Qitr, qaf, tara. It can be used for molten brass, copper, iron, metal, some kind of metal. So, just as water flows out, similarly, molten metal would flow out for him. And when it would flow out, just like lava, right? If you think about it, lava, what is it? It's a very strong mineral. And as it flows out, it flows like water almost, very slowly, and eventually it cools down. Isn't it? And when it cools down, it hardens. Isn't it so? It becomes hard. So similarly, this molten brass, it would flow out, and just as iron was soft for Dawood alayhi salam, copper or metal or brass was soft for Sulaiman alayhi salam. And he could mold it in whatever shape that he wanted to. He could mold it in whatever shape that he wanted to. How do people typically make these metals soft? By heating them up, by exposing them to the fire. Remember Dhul Qarnayn, what did he say? Atuni zubur al-hadid. He made it burn, and then إِذَا جَعْلَهُ نَارًا, right? He made it completely like fire. He burnt it completely so that it had become liquid. And then Atuni ufriq alayhi qitra. Remember qitr, we also learned over there in Surah Al-Kahf. Ufriq alayhi qitra. I will pour on it molten brass or metal or something like that. So people have to use fire, and they also have to use some kind of equipment, like for example a hammer or something, with which they will constantly beat and hit and strike metal. And because of the heat that is produced by constantly beating it, constantly striking it, then it's possible for you to mold it. But look at how easy it was for Sulaiman alayhi salam. It flew for him just as water flows out of a spring. That simple. وَأَسَلْنَا لَهُ عَيْنَ الْقِطْرِ. More blessings. وَمِنَ الْجِنِّ, and of the jinn, مَنْ يَعْمَلُ بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ, who would work before him. Before who? بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ, before Sulaiman alayhi salam. Meaning, right before his eyes. They would work for him. Who? The jinn. But how would they work for him? بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ, by the permission of his Lord. Many people claim that they have jinn in their control, or that so and so has jinn in their control. And they tell the jinn to do such and such, and the jinn does it. Or this is what people at least desire. I wish I had a jinn in my control, so that when the exam is coming up, I could just tell the jinn, go look and tell me what's coming. Or I could just go tell the jinn to do this for me, do that for me. It doesn't work like that. Because jinn, what do? It's up to them. If they want to obey you, they'll obey you. And if they don't want to obey you, they will not obey you. This is why when a magician even uses the jinn, when a magician, he uses a jinn, what does he do? He pleases the jinn. He sacrifices for the jinn, makes him happy, so that the jinn will work for him. But does the jinn always work for him? Not necessarily. Does he work the way the magician wants him to? Not necessarily. But we see that Sulaiman alayhi salam, the jinn, how do they work for him? Obediently. Why? بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ, by the permission of his Lord. This was an exclusive allowance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to Sulaiman alayhi salam. This was a special case, that the jinn were also subservient to him. Which is why he had not just the armies of human beings, but also the armies of the jinn and also the birds. You can understand this just as if a person has a bird. He owns a bird. And some birds, they can talk. You keep the bird in the cage, you train it, talk like this, say this, say that. And what happens? If a guest comes and you tell the parrot to talk, will it talk always? No. Sometimes it's as though it doesn't know a word. Why? Because it has its own will. If it wants to talk, it will talk. But Sulaiman alayhi salam, the birds were in his control. And likewise, the jinn were also in his control. And this was only for him. It wasn't for anyone else. Where do we learn this from? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says over here, بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ, by the special permission of his Lord. And we also learn from a hadith that Abu Hurairah radhiyallahu anhu, he reported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam once said that a highly wicked one amongst the jinn, escaped last night to interrupt my prayer. Meaning he came to interrupt me in my salah. But Allah gave me power over him. So the jinn came to interrupt the salah of the Prophet ﷺ. From another hadith we learn that he tried to harm the Prophet ﷺ, but the Prophet ﷺ was given power over him. So he said that I seized him. I caught him and I intended to tie him to one of the pillars of the masjid so that all of you may look at him. So the Prophet ﷺ, what did he intend to do? Tie him up to the masjid so that the people would see the jinn the next day and the children would also see the jinn the next day. Because he had been given authority over the jinn. But he said that I remembered the supplication of my brother Sulaiman. That, O my Lord, forgive me and give me such a kingdom as will not be possible for anyone after me. Give me such a kingdom that will not be possible for anyone after me. Give me such authority that is exclusively for who? For me. And part of that authority was also this authority over the jinn. So part of this authority was what? Authority over the jinn. That no one else has been given besides Sulaiman alayhi salam. The Prophet ﷺ, he was able to. But did he? He didn't, because he remembered the dua of Sulaiman alayhi salam. And he didn't tie up that jinn then. And we also learn in Surah Al-Anbiya, ayah number 82, that وَمِنَ الشَّيَاطِينِ مَنْ يَغُوصُونَ لَهُ وَيَعْمَلُونَ عَمَلًا دُونَ ذَلِكَ وَكُنَّا لَهُمْ حَافِظِينَ. And of the devils were those who dived for him. They would dive for him, where? Into the sea, into the ocean. And they would do work other than that as well. They would also do a lot of construction work for him. And all this time, Allah was of them a guardian. وَكُنَّا لَهُمْ حَافِظِينَ. Allah was watching them, to make sure they would not disobey Sulaiman alayhi salam. You understand? So بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ, what does it show? That Allah made sure the jinn were under him. That they would not disobey Sulaiman alayhi salam. They would not escape him. And you remember in Surah Al-Baqarah we learned that after Sulaiman alayhi salam died, people accused him of having committed magic. Remember? Which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا كَفَرَ سُلَيْمَانُ وَلَكِنَّ الشَّيَاطِينَ كَفَرُوا. Right? Because the jinn were under his control. And so people assumed that it was through the power of magic that he had the jinn under his control. It wasn't through magic. What was it? It was a special favor of Allah upon him. Just as the birds were made subservient for him, similarly the jinn were. And these jinn, what would they do? مَنْ يَعْمَلُ بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ. They would work for him. Different types of work they would do for him. And how would they do it? Before him, in front of him. وَمَنْ يَزِغْ مِنْهُمْ. And whoever deviated from them, يَزِغْ, زَيْ يَا غَيْن, زَيْغ, which is to deviate. So whoever deviated amongst them, amongst who? Amongst who? Amongst the jinn. Meaning if anyone dared to disobey Sulaiman alayhi salam, if anyone dared to deceive him in any way, because the jinn you can't see, right? You can't exactly see the jinn. The jinn might say, okay, I'll do this for you, and he doesn't do it. The jinn says, like for example, we learned that when the Queen of Sheba, her throne was to be brought, the jinn offered, Ifrit min al-jinn, that I will bring the throne. Now imagine he goes to bring the throne, he never comes back. Could he do that? No way. Could he just say, yeah, I'll bring the throne, and he takes half the things off of the throne? No way. He couldn't do it. Because وَمَنْ يَزِغْ مِنْهُمْ. If anyone dared to deviate amongst them, عَنْ أَمْرِنَا, from our command. Whose command? The command of Allah to the jinn to obey Sulaiman alayhi salam. So if anyone deviated from this command, نُذِقْهُ, we would make him taste مِنْ عَذَابِ السَّعِيرِ, the punishment of the blazing fire. What does it mean by this? نُذِقْهُ مِنْ عَذَابِ السَّعِيرِ. Some have said that this is the punishment in the hereafter that those jinn will suffer. Which jinn? Those who disobeyed Sulaiman alayhi salam. That just as a human being, an insan, if he disobeys the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then what is the threat? In the hereafter, he will have adhab as-sa'ir. What does it show? That the jinn were also mukallaf. What does it mean by mukallaf? Never heard of that term. I've mentioned it so many times. Accountable. Someone who is accountable. Mukallaf is from taklif. And what does taklif mean? Taklif, responsibility in Arabic. La nukallifu nafsan illa wus'aha. We do not burden a soul. Okay, we don't burden a soul with more than what it can bear. So it's the burden of responsibility. So just as people are mukallaf, like a person who is an adult, who is sane, that he is mukallaf with praying salah, right? He is responsible for praying salah. If he doesn't pray salah, will he be held accountable? Of course. But if there's a 5-year-old child, if he doesn't pray salah, will he be held accountable? No. If there's a 25-year-old person, but they suffer from some mental disorder, and they don't pray salah, will they be held responsible? No. But we see that the jinn, are they mukallaf? They are mukallaf. Just as the human beings are. Because what do we see? That if anyone disobeyed Sulaiman alayhi salam, what is for him? Adab as-sa'ir, in the hereafter. Some have said that what this means is, نُذِقْهُ مِنْ عَذَابِ السَّعِيدِ, this punishment was in the dunya. That immediately that jinn would be burnt up. If any jinn dared to disobey Sulaiman alayhi salam, immediately he would be burnt. How? That an angel would smite him with a lash of fire that would completely scorch that jinn. So they didn't dare to disobey Sulaiman alayhi salam. Because if they deviated even slightly, an angel would smite him with a scorch of fire, with a lash of fire, and it would completely burn him, finish him completely. This is just like if a person has said Ayatul Kursi to protect himself. If a person has said Bismillah before entering the house, can shaitan come? If he dares to come, then shaitan gets punished. Meaning he gets some kind of pain, some kind of harm. Like for instance, if he tries to interfere where he's not allowed to, the Ayatul Kursi has been said, then the angels are guarding, right? Now if the shaitan dares to come, who will punish him? The angel will. This is just like in the heavens when the Qur'an was being revealed. In the skies, was there a lot of protection? A lot of security? Yes. So at that time, if any jinn dared to go up there to listen, what would happen? A shooting star would be hurled at him, and that's it, he would be burnt. So similarly, if any jinn dared to disobey Sulaiman alayhi salam, نُذِقْهُ مِنْ عَذَابِ السَّعِيرِ, even in the dunya. Now what would these jinn do for him? يَعْمَلُونَ لَهُ, they would do for him, meaning they made for him, because amal is also used for making something. So they would make for him, for Sulaiman alayhi salam, مَا يَشَاءُ, whatever that he willed. Whatever that he wanted. Whatever he wanted made, whatever he wanted constructed, the jinn would make it for him. These days, what do people use? Machinery, equipment, people. But Sulaiman alayhi salam, what would he use? The jinn. Because the jinn have physical strength, right? They can fly, they can go up, they can dive deep down. So, يَعْمَلُونَ لَهُ مَا يَشَاءُ. And what is it that they would make for him? مِن مَحَارِيبَ, of elevated chambers. Maharib is a plural of mihrab. And what is a mihrab? A prayer room. A place where a person prays, worships Allah. Have we done this word before? Many times. Especially in the stories of Maryam alayhi salam, Zakaria alayhi salam, right? And mihrab, maharib are basically understood in two ways. Okay, mihrab is understood in two ways. One is the prayer room, the prayer chamber. And it's derived from the word harb. And what does harb mean? Battle, war. So, in this place, when a person is worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is he fighting against? His nafs. Those of you who have done i'tikaf, or you intend to do it inshallah this Ramadan, you will experience that. That you have to fight against what? Your nafs. You have to fight against your nafs. You just want to lie down and not do anything and just take it easy and go talk to that person and just go see what's going on outside and have a long conversation with someone, but you can't do that. You have to constantly battle against your nafs. How? So mihrab is that place. So maharib are what? Masajid, worship places, ma'abid, places of worship. So these jinn, they would make for Sulaiman alayhi salam worship places where people would go and worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Typically a king, what does he want constructed? What kind of places? Okay, his own palaces. his own residence, monuments, huge monuments, perhaps of his own figure, his appearance, his face, right? But we see that Sulaiman a.s., he had constructed masajid and ma'abid. Secondly, they said that maharib, it refers to very high, strong palaces and forts. And why are they called maharib? Because in times of war, in times of battle, what do people attack first? We're not looking at worship places now. We're looking at the fortresses. We're looking at the palaces. What do people attack first? The tallest buildings. Isn't it so? And also the most important buildings, like for example, government buildings. Right? And we see that, for instance, when the Yahud at Khaybar, when they were besieged, where were they? In their fortresses. Remember? So, why are they called maharib? Because they are yuharabu. They are attacked. You understand? Why are they called maharib? Because they're yuharabu, they're attacked in times of war. So, these jinn, what would they construct for Sulaiman a.s.? Fortresses. Fortresses that were made either for war strategies, that in case there is an attack, that is where the people would go and take protection. Because Sulaiman a.s. had many armies. So where he had armies, he also had means of protecting his people. And what was that? In the form of fortresses. So يَعْمَلُونَ لَهُ مَا يَشَاءُ مِن مَحَارِيبٍ, and also وَتَمَاثِيلَ, and images, statues. They would also make statues for him. Tamathil is a plural of timsal. Ibrahim a.s. asked his father, مَا هَذِهِ التَّمَاثِيلِ أَنْتُمْ لَهَا عَاكِفُونَ. What are these tamathil that you are so devoted to? What is a timsal? What's the root? Mim, sa, lam. What does mathal mean? Example. And what does mithil mean? Equivalent, that which is similar to the other. And timsal is an imitation. Is an imitation of something that Allah has made. It's an imitation of something that Allah has made. Like for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made human beings. Now if a person makes a sculpture of human beings, what is that? Timsal. Similarly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made lions. If a person makes a sculpture of a lion, what is that? Timsal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made birds. If a person makes a sculpture of a bird, what is that? Timsal. Okay? And timsal could be of something that is living and also something that is non-living. What does it mean by that? Like for example, it could be of human beings, birds, animals, and it could also be of, let's say, trees, flowers. Similarly, mountains. Typically people don't make sculptures of mountains, but timsal would also include pictures, paintings, not just sculpture, not just 3D, but also 2D. Not just sculptures, but also paintings, images of living as well as non-living. So, these jinn, they would make for him tamathil. Now, tamathil by definition, it includes sculptures of living beings. Now, is it that these jinn would make sculptures of living beings or non-living beings? What would they make for him? What kind of statues, what kind of artwork, what kind of paintings and images would they make for him? What kind? There's a difference of opinion. Some have said everything, from non-living to living. Why? Because this was not something forbidden in the Sharia of Sulaiman a.s. And in the Sharia of the Prophet ﷺ, this is something that was completely forbidden. Completely forbidden. In the previous Shara'i, it was permissible, but because each time or many times it led to shirk, this is why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent His final messenger, He made drawing of pictures and sculptures and everything forbidden. Do you understand? Others have said that no, this tamathil cannot be of living beings as well. It was only of non-living things. And what's the evidence they give for that? That these people Who were they? Bani Israel. Isn't it so? And the Bani Israel, when they crossed the sea, Musa a.s. went to get the Torah. What did they do from behind? They made the sculpture, a timsal of what? An ijl, a calf. And what happened to that calf? What did Musa a.s. do? He burnt it. Isn't it so? He destroyed it. So that's the evidence that other scholars use to show that tamasil over here does not include the sculptures, the paintings, the drawings of living things. Rather, it only refers to those of non-living things. Like, for instance, flowers, leaves, vines, right? Or other things. So they would make tamasil. You may have noticed that when it comes to artwork, when it comes to monuments, when it comes to architecture, when it comes to decorating buildings, it's not just sculptures that are used. Isn't it so? Many things can be made. Many things can be drawn. So they would do everything but non-living things. وَجِفَانٍ. Besides the tamasil, what else would they make for him? Jifanin. Jifan is a plural of jifna or jafna. Jim, fa, noon, ta marbuta. Jim, fa, noon, ta marbuta with a kasra under the jim or a fatha on the jim. And what does it mean by that? A huge bowl. And a bowl in which food can be prepared, but also a bowl from which people eat from. Like people together, they eat from. So wajifanin, huge bowls, and these bowls from which people ate, from which his armies ate, how huge were they? Kal jawab, like large reservoirs. Jawab is a plural of jabiyah. It's the plural of jabiyah. Jim, alif, ba, ya, ta marbuta. And jabiyah is a huge pool or a pond in which a lot of water has collected. So imagine the bowls from which the armies ate, how huge were they? Like large reservoirs. And around each of these jifan, what would happen? Many people would gather up together and they would eat from it. You know, sometimes you may have seen that, for instance, in Arab culture, when they serve food sometimes, they have this huge platter and they have rice and they have big pieces of meat. And what do people do? They sit around it, isn't it? And they eat together out of it. Isn't it so? That's what they do. So, imagine this is not just a huge platter, but what is it? It's like a huge reservoir. It's deep, it's like endless. So people would come, they would eat, they would go, more would come, eat and go, more would come and eat and go. Just as if you have a pond and animals, you may have seen in pictures that in deserts especially, where water is scarce, animals are around the ponds, isn't it? And what do? They're constantly drinking. You won't find even a part of the pond that is left empty. All the animals are there. And they go and more come. They go and more come. So like this were the bowls from which the armies would eat. وَجِفَانٍ كَالْجَوَابِ. What does it show? Two things. First of all, the generosity of Sulaiman a.s. That how he would make the jinn construct jifanin kal jawab. This was not something ordinary that people could make. He used the jinn to make these so that he could make sure that his people were eating. Also, this shows to us the huge number of people, perhaps in his armies or in his nation, the huge number of people that he fed. So, وَجِفَانٍ كَالْجَوَابِ وَقُدُورٍ, and cooking pots. And these cooking pots were like what? How huge were they? What was their size? They were rasiyatin. They were ones fixed just like mountains. Qudur is a plural of qidr. And what is a qidr? A cooking pot, a cooking vessel, a kettle. So these kettles or these cooking pots, how are they? Rasiyat. Rasiyat is a plural of rasiyah. Rasiyah. There is another plural of the word rasiyah. Rawasi. And rawasi is generally used for mountains. Rusu. Rasi and waw. What does rusu mean? To be firmly fixed. So rasiyat, these cooking pots were firmly fixed in the ground. Why were they fixed in the ground? For what purpose? Different purposes. One could be that they were so huge it was impossible to move them. They were so huge that it was impossible to move them. So how were they made? They were fixed into the ground. How were they made? They were fixed into the ground. I remember somebody was telling us once that in India, there was this particular shrine where close to which they used to live, and at every festival, Allahu Alam which festival, a lot of people would come. And when they would come, they would also eat. So how would they prepare the food? That they would have huge rooms, okay, literally like rooms, and they would have ladders in which you would go down, and people would bring sacks of rice and lentils and oats and grains and different things. And they would just dump everything inside and let it cook and cook and cook and cook. It would cook for a very long time. And then the men, they would go down into the cooking pot and they would, smash it or mash it with their feet or Allahu Alam what. And when the food was made, then people would eat it. So, literally like a huge room in which 5 or 6 men, what are they doing? They're smashing the food with their feet or their hands or whatever, and then they're taking the food and giving it out to the people. Obviously, it's not something to do with Tawheed. They would consider that food to be very blessed, because people would bring all of that for the sake of the person who had been buried over there, whose shrine it was. So all that food would be cooked together and then it would be distributed amongst the people. So anyway, just so that you can relate it, Sulaiman alayhi salam, he had qudur that were rasiyat, that were so huge, they were massive, that they were like mountains in their size, and they were firmly fixed like mountains. It was impossible to move them. You understand? It was impossible to move them. They were so huge, because he had so many armies to feed. Also, it has been said that qudur rasiyat means that they were constantly fixed on the fire. Fixed on the fire. What does it mean by that? Always in use. Always in use. You may have seen that, for instance, if there is a particular set of lunch dishes that you bring to school every day. What happens? You bring them to school, you go back home in the evening, you wash them, you put them in the dish rack. Before they dry and you can put them away in the cupboard, what happens the next morning? You have to bring them to school again. Isn't it? So, do they ever get put away in the cupboard? Only on the weekends. You may have noticed it. Or some dishes, some cooking pots, which women like a lot, and they use it for everything, what happens? They're constantly on the stove. You wash it, you put it on the stove, you use it there, you never get the chance to dry it and put it away in the cupboard. Why? Because it's being used constantly. So similarly, these qudur, these cooking vessels, they were rasiyat, always on fire, fixed on the fire. Meaning food was always being prepared. All the time, round the clock. This was how generous Sulaiman alayhi salam was. And you can imagine the number of people, the number of armies that he would feed, including the jinn and the birds and Allahu Alam, what all. So, i'malu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded Sulaiman alayhi salam, Dawood alayhi salam, that i'malu ala Dawooda, O family of Dawood, shukran, with thanks, with gratitude. Who does ala Dawood refer to? The family of Dawood refers to the Bani Israel. His son Sulaiman alayhi salam and his people, and who were they? The Bani Israel. So, i'malu ala Dawooda shukra. What kind of work should you do when you have all of these blessings? Work of shukr, work of gratitude. What does it mean by this work of gratitude? Meaning, do such deeds with which Allah will be happy. Perform acts of obedience to Him. Why? Out of gratitude. Do that which is right with all of these blessings. Use them, don't abuse them. Be grateful, don't be arrogant. Use them the right way. i'malu ala Dawooda shukra. Wa qalilun min ibadiya shakur. And very few of my servants, they are grateful. Very few of the servants of Allah are grateful. Most people, how are they? What's their way? Of ingratitude. They have many blessings. They don't use them properly. They don't thank Allah for it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the family of Dawood alayhi salam in particular, be grateful. وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. And very few of my servants are grateful. And we have done the details of shukr earlier in Surah Luqman and also before, that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a blessing to a person, what does it mean by shukr? That a person does shukr in his qalb, on his lisan, and also through his actions. So over here, amal is mentioned. That don't just feel grateful in your heart, don't just say thank you, but also do something to show that you're grateful. Do something to show that you're grateful. And what is it that you would do? Increase in your obedience to Allah. Use all of these blessings the right way.